Oh, Mr. Thumbs Up there, Richard, the king of the cables, liked our new vlog on the vlog intro so much we decided to double down and play it here, even though we're in the basic series now under Luminaries. As I understand it, Leia anticipates having a new introduction for this series as early as tomorrow. So we're hopeful that that occurs. And I think we'll even have an enhancement either tomorrow or on Monday to the vlog on the vlog, a little different ending to it. Well done. It's fun to be introduced that way anyway. It's a very classy and creative and job mission, if you will, inspiring piece. So thank you for creating that for us. As we return to the Luminary series, we are now actually in the 15th chapter of that book. So we've made a lot of progress through this material. We are still, however, with Noach as we pursue the story of the Luminaries, and it is about to get especially interesting, particularly as we get toward the conclusion of Noach's life. And keep in mind, Noach is the father of Shem, and while Noach is the redeployment of Chanukh, Shem, the story was actually just beginning. The bad were gone, but the good had yet to get going. And that is a story in and of itself. Yahowah has revealed and will continue to demonstrate that Adam, Yahowah's firstborn, was redeployed, as I have just mentioned, as Shem by mistake, an ark. He was briefly inserted as Eldod as Moshe was melting down. That would be considerably after this point of time. But notably, the chosen one burst onto the scene larger than life as Dowd, the very son of God who became king of Israel. He would return as Emmanuel, and that was to fulfill the Moedim of Matzah, which includes Pesach, Matzah, and Bokorim. It is a life explained and explored in the prophets and in the Psalms, many of which, he wrote, contributing to the Mizmor. And as we know, glory awaits Yahweh's Gadowl and Ma'owr, greater luminary, as he will eventually settle into the responsibility of returning as king and being Elyon, the very presence and influence of God. Well, somewhat similarly, Chanukh was redeployed as Noach. He was reinserted to bolster Moshe alongside Eldod as Midod, but said nothing that was significantly relevant to record. Not at that time. That wasn't his mission. And he was given the opportunity to strut his stuff as Boaz alongside Ruth. This same soul would return as Ethan Ha-Ezraki on behalf of his great grandson, redeeming our Redeemer. And while as boldly confident as his predecessor, Boaz, Ethan was all business. He was a man of many words, and most of them were inspired by God. Boaz would reappear as the father of Emmanuel, as was foretold in Yeshaya 7. And like my son, I had written all about it previously, my words captured throughout the Mashal and also in his Mizmor. And now here we are. The same soul Yahowah chose to be with him as Chanukh and redeployed as Noach is sharing these insights with you as Yada, the long-awaited Nakar and the Choder. Even the purpose is the same, restoring Dowd's acclaim. But now, after 3 mostly mum lives by at least comparison, I'm the most vocal of Bashar heralds, having written and spoken more than all of the other players in God's story combined. And at this point, God wants you to appreciate that neither Dowd nor Yada began speaking for Yahowah. Item speaks twice, but says nothing of God, and that was sufficiently memorable that it was recorded. And we don't have a word from Shem nor from Eldad. And even with Dowd, he was well into his senior years before he became a prolific prophet. Corresponding to this, we hear nothing from Chinook. Not a word from the man. Noach's lone narrative is recorded a sentence before his passing is announced. And as was the case with Dowd, it wouldn't be until this fourth deployment that the man known as Ethan began to speak for God. And even then, he's credited with very little of it. And this is to say that even the Gadowl and Qatan Ma'owr are tasked with learning on the job. They grow into their sandals, if you will. They are sons before men, students before teachers. And even at that, knowledge and understanding, conclusions and insights are actually hard won. They are fashioned and they're formed with considerable time and effort. It is the way it was. It is the way it is. It is the way it will always be, now and forever. As suggested, there is more to the story than Noach, Shem, and family within the Tebah that Yahowah shared and that we benefit from knowing. So let's jump back in. Let's hop back aboard and glean what we can in this amazing ride on the Tebah, the vessel of insights. It reads, God always remembered and continually proclaimed what he thought about the memorable man, Zakar. He recalled and provided a reminder mentioning these events pertaining to Noach, who is, in this case, the memorable man. He is a reliable leader and a spiritual guide based upon the etymology of his name, a responsive explorer who directs us to a safe and peaceful place. It is from Naka, to lead and guide, creating an opportunity for a more favorable state, which is reliable and can be trusted, as well as from Nuach, which is to provide a situation for the spirit to settle down and rest, even abide and remain. Along with all of the life forms, including all of the animals which were with him in the Tebah, this vessel of insights and this ship designed for the harvest. Then God caused the Spirit like a wind to pass over the region, and the waters subsided and they receded. It's a lot to convey in what is just considered one verse. Bereshith, in the beginning, the opening line of the 8th chapter. Now here we take note that there are very few Zakar in God's story. He would refer to them as memorable men. But Noach is clearly among them. He is an exemplar, a man through whom participation in the covenant, involvement in the very family of God is made possible. When we listen and respond to Yahowah, doing as he has requested, he will think favorably of us and remember us. Zakar. And considering who he is and who we are by comparison, that's a pretty good deal. When his family, Noach and his family had been passed over as a prophetic example of what would happen in Egypt at the inception of the Exodus, particularly during the first Passover. The Tebah is a symbol of Yahweh's spirit, protecting Noah during the storm and therefore extending his life. Searching for Noah's ark seems to be more captivating to people than considering Yahweh's word. And finding the reason behind the story of the flood is something that very few people even consider. And yet the Tebah floated above a corrupt world to introduce us to the concept of the covenant. And yet, ignorant of its purpose, countless people have mounted expeditions to Mount Ararat, and even more have scoffed at them. So that we do not leave this stone unturned, let's consider what Yahweh revealed. He says the waters withdrew and returned out of the region. Departing and traveling back, the waters receded at the conclusion of 150 days. It is so obvious that it is hard to fathom why no one has mentioned it. The verb shub means to return. Since the floodwaters did not go back into the sky, it means that the principal source of the deluge was the place to which they returned, the sea. The region was inundated with water as a consequence of an asteroid strike and the resulting tsunami. The waters would eventually depart, traveling back from their furthest extent unto the sea, 150 days after the initial onslaught. As a result, the Tebah would go with the flow. Well, that is until its keel hit ground. The text reads, the Tebah came to rest in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, among the mountains of Ararat. Now, just so you don't miss the guidance, Noach's spiritual rest is, as I've shared previously, is the basis of Noach, and it was just repeated here with the Tebah coming to Noach. Also relevant, the 17th day of the 7th month is the second of 8 days of Sukkah. God did not say that the ark was on Mount Ararat. Harvey in the plural can mean, it's Hari, I should say. No, there's no V in it. Hari, particularly in the plural, can mean high country and ridge lines, mountains or hills, but it is not typically rendered as mount. Further, al can mean near, before, close to, among, and even toward, just as easily as on. Having descended with the returning waters, the Tebah would have actually been pushed away from the high country and the ridge lines. It is not only basics hydrodynamics, but this is also what Yahweh described. According to the Brown Driver Briggs Hebrew and English lexicon, and almost every other linguistic tool I consulted on the subject, analysis of cuneiform inscriptions revealed that Ararat in Assyria is Urartu. It is a region in eastern Armenia between the Aras, the Araxes River, Lake Van, and Lake Urmia. The Aras River travels along and about 100 miles north of Lake Van and then turns southeast on the other side of what's considered Mount Ararat today. This places the summit of the volcanic range less than 75 miles north by northeast of Lake Van, which was coterminous with the Garden of Eden. These mountains run north and south and perpendicular to the eastern Taurus Mountains, skirting the northernmost Iranian and southernmost Armenian borders with Turkey. There has been a credible account regarding the resting place of the ark that was initially provided by a fellow named Ron Wyatt. He has subsequently passed away. I have met with his widow. I have been in his home. I have seen his museum. That was many years ago, however. And he noticed on an aerial photograph published by the Turkish military that there was a ship-shaped object in the mountains some 20 miles south of Mount Ararat. Before he decided to investigate, he confirmed the location by building a three-dimensional model, which I have actually witnessed, of the area in a large tub along with a replica of the Tebah, the vessel. He watched as the waters retreated and noted that his replica flowed down and away from the highest peaks, placing it near the location in the photograph. His story is detailed in the Discovery volume, published by the Wyatt Archaeological Research Center, and in a 2-hour video presentation called Discovered, Noah's Ark. I've read it, I've seen it, I've been to his museum in Tennessee, and I've interviewed Ron Wyatt's widow, Mary Nell Wyatt, now Mrs. Lee, after remarrying. The evidence Ron marshals is sufficient to confirm his findings to someone familiar with Yahowah's testimony to the dimensions and the location, but likely insufficient to prove it to a skeptic due to the condition of the remains and difficulty of traveling through the war-torn region of eastern Turkey. However, you can use the satellite view on Google Maps, as I have done, to see the splayed fossilized remnant of the Tebah. It is in Turkey's Noah's Ark National Park, located about 2,000 meters above mean sea level, close to 7,000 feet, and less than 100 kilometers northeast of Lake Van along Turkish route E99. It is 30 kilometers, in case you're planning a trip, pack a lunch, south of Mount Ararat, which is 5,137 meters. 30 kilometers west of the Armenian border and 20 kilometers north of Iran. The GPS coordinates are 39, 26, 26 north, 44, 14, 5.3 east. Also found and pictured were massive drug stones. Now, these were used to create drag. And you might say, why would you want to create drag? Well, because this was a very stormy occasion, and it is essential under such circumstances to keep the bow of the Tebah turned into the wind for stability. And if you have all of that weight hanging on lines from the bow, these rogue stones will keep the ship turned into the wind. Brilliant strategy. Noach had his PhD, I think, in naval architecture. Either that or he had a really sharp companion that he could query from time to time. But the stones are there. Now, before we leave this passage, however, know that the 7th month is actually the most important on Yahowah's calendar. It is home to 3 Miqra'ey, invitations to be called out and meet. Towrah, trumpets, which is the first day of the 7th month. It's the great day of Yahowah. Yom Kippurim, the day of reconciliations, which is the 10th day of the 7th month. It denotes Dowd's and Yahweh's return. And then there is Sukkah, shelters, the 15th day of the 7th month, and it lasts for 8 days. The 17th day of the 7th month would place it in the midst of Yahweh's final 8-day party of the year. This may be why in Bereshith, Genesis 8:4, Noach and his family were shown camping out with God and celebrating his protection in harmony with the future celebration of the Miqra'ey. Now, based upon a lunar month of approximately 29 and a half days, 70 days after Sukkah shelter celebration, we read the following. The waters continued their journey, and they receded until the 10th month. So on the 1st of the 10th month, the tops of the hills became visible. That is to say that they were no longer concealed and blanketed in snow, and that the clouds and fog had finally lifted. Yahweh repeats things that he wants us to understand and never forget. 40 happens to be the time designated in the Torah for a completion of a time of testing. Continuing with his narrative, and then it came to pass after the completion of 40 days, Noach opened a window of the ark, which to get the most out of this beneficial relationship and journey through life, he had acted to fashion and form Bereshith, Genesis 8:6. With Yahweh, we always have access to the light, a portal to see God, and a window of opportunity. And while that is true of any day, timing still matters to God. So we can measure it in periods of 40 as we count the years from the garden and then back to Eden. Specifically, there will be 3 full sets of 40 Yobel years from 3968 BCE, when we were escorted out of the garden, Adam and Chawah were, to 1968 BCE. From 1968 BCE, which is when Yishak and Abraham climbed Mount Moriah with Noach and Shem as witnesses to affirm the covenant's narrative, there would be another exactly 40 Yobel to 33 CE, which is when Dowd and his father Boaz combined to fulfill Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim in 33 CE, which is year 4000 Yah. Of course, then from 33 CE to 2033, which would be year 6000 Yah, when the rest of these fall Miqra'ey are fulfilled, we have another 40 Yobel, each demarcating monumental events and our return to God's company. That is, so long as we do as Noach had done and engage opening the window to perceive what God has to say to us. Now, if we move on, it's worth noting that ravens are smart. But, that only gets a person so far, and often into trouble. They are as black ever gets, and they can be mean. Therefore, the moral of the story is that not every approach to God works. It reads, he sent out a raven. It went about leaving the area. And then it turned around and came back until the waters were dried up from the area. Neither the Tebah, Beryth, Towrah, or Yahowah would be served by this bird. The raven was clever, but too much like the adversary, not unlike the men who had once lived in this region. But more than this, it is likely that Yahweh wanted the covenant family to bond a little while longer. The eighth statement reveals the universal symbol for Yahweh's spirit and for the him descending in a way that can relate to us, to resolve conflict in our presence. It reads, then he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters had receded and become of little concern, Kalal, from upon the surface of the ground, Adamah. However, the dove did not find a resting place for the soles of her feet, and so she returned to him and to the Tebah, because the waters were still on the face of this entire region. And so he reached out his hand and he grasped hold of her and he brought her back into the vessel with him. Then he waited another 7 days. And again, he set forth the dove from this vessel of insights, Barashith 8:10. And the dove came to him around dusk, and behold, noting a freshly picked Zayth Eleh olive branch, replete with a leaf. It is Zayth Eleh, which is foliage from an olive tree, including a leaf and a stem, from Allah to ascend, rising up, and an unused root for Zayth, meaning to be brilliant and bright. And this was in her mouth, within the orifice for breathing, communicating, and investing nourishment. And therefore, Noach, the spiritual guide and reliable explorer, he knew. Yada. He became aware, and he acknowledged. He was shown and understood. And by being observant, he acquired and became familiar with the information he needed to realize and comprehend something vitally important. This was call imperfect, third person singular. He actually and literally, genuinely, in concert with the relationship between him and the olive branch even, became cognizant with unfolding consequences, which led to continual understanding by ongoing observation that indeed the waters had receded and there was no longer a concern throughout the region. To address some of the symbolism associated with the dove, Yonah describes the kind of life Yahweh would like us to live. The covenant's children are to sparkle with passion and enthusiasm. As heirs of the universe, we should be effervescent and eager, living life with vitality and gusto. God's just not into sourpusses. I know that every life has its moments of depression, but we need to recover from them. We need to sparkle with the passion of enthusiasm. That is the root of Yonah. Live life with gusto. Now, the reason the dove was not initially successful was to demonstrate the value of perseverance. If we prevailed with our first attempt every time, there'd be no challenge to overcome, no opportunity for growth, no occasion to reveal our fortitude and character. Now, for example, I have worked on this for so long, and over the last quarter century have learned so much. I think it's now my 10th edit of Yahowah while composing these 3 volumes of Coming Home simultaneously. I have recomposed every translation and rewritten most of the commentary for every book multiple times. It's exciting because the improvements demonstrate that we are continuing to grow, both in knowledge and understanding. And truly, the more we learn, the better we are positioned to learn. The more we comprehend, the more we can understand. But there is more. The dove explicitly returned to the Tebah and to be with Noach. And Noach received her, reaching out with his hand and grasping hold of her. Now, this is exactly what Yahowah wants us to do with him, which is why he is shown with, 5 hands in his name. He is reaching out to us with the yod, and there are 2 hays, 2 people standing up and reaching up to him with both hands. Yahowah is also teaching us that his plan of reconciliation and redemption is not instantaneous. Boy, do I ever know that. It instead plays out over the course of the Moedim, over months, over years, over the millennia. Represented in this case by the additional 7 days is to direct our attention to this reality. Moreover, he too will return around dusk on Kippurim, just after the world has turned hideously black. We will see the ultimate light. The Zayeth Ele, the olive branch, is also revealing in that the olive represents the spirit and the branch, the sun. She is a source of light, of nourishment, healing, and longevity, as the olive is also these very things. The fruit's oil provided the purest form of light known in the ancient world. By its flame, dark places were brightened, and people who read in its glow were enlightened. Olive oil was not only healthy, it was medicinal, healing those who were suffering. Now, Dowd, with whom Yahowah will return, is represented by the Ele, the branch. But so is Noach, who will become Yada as the Towrah, the branch from the tree of lives and of knowledge, by presenting leaves to the light and bearing fruit. God's foremost branches enable the covenant family to ascend, rising up to God as we become Zayeth, brilliant and bright. The beneficiaries of their fruit are properly nourished, and they become fruitful in and of themselves. And speaking of such things, we have another affirmation that the entire world wasn't flooded. For an olive branch to be recently plucked, tender and fresh, there were trees above the floodwaters. An olive tree will not survive a month, much less part of a year, with wet feet. Now, moving on to one of the most empowering words in the Hebrew language, Noach came to Yada, to know, which he could know these things that he would not otherwise see. He Yada because he was aware and he acknowledged what could be understood based upon what he needed to know. By being Yada, observant, he acquired the information that he used to comprehend something vitally important to his family's survival. Yada is used in the title of all of these series of books. You can see them over my shoulder here. In fact, that's the whole series that represents about a quarter of the books that I have written, and they're all offered free at Yah.com. But they all bear the title, Yada, to know Yahowah. So it is important to recognize that God wants us to Yada him. As is the case with the covenant, our journey with God is just beginning when we are beginning our walk out of man's world. And it concludes when we walk into his. So what follows suggests that Yahowah is especially supportive of families as well. He continues to be interested in the well-being of animal life. And of course, to be of value, we must continue to be productive, all of which is conveyed. Then God spoke to Noach to say, come out of the Tebah, you and your wife, your sons and your sons' wives with you. 8:16. Bring out with you every one of the living creatures which beneficially were with you, so that they may be fruitful and become numerous throughout this region. And then Noach went out, his sons and his wife, and his son's wife with him. Every one of the life forms by their genus came out of the Tebah. Then Noach built an altar, a place to question the who, what, where, why, when, and how of a sacrifice. It is from an interrogatory asking these very questions, and it is about Zabak, making the sacrifice, to approach Yahowah. So he selected and accepted some from each of the clean animals and some from each of the clean birds, and he lifted them up, raising them at the altar. So this exodus from the vessel was clearly a celebration of life. These are the two things God holds dearest. The next to life and family, Yahowah values freedom. He did not keep these men and women or the animals cooped up inside the Tebah any longer than was absolutely necessary to secure their safety and their freedom. The door was opened for all to live, reproduce, grow, and to explore. Noach's first thought as he disembarked was to thank Yahowah, showing his appreciation for sparing his life, his son's lives, his wife, and his sons' wives, in addition to the lives of all of the animals aboard the ship of the harvest. In this regard, he built something. He did not get down on his knees, he did not pray, and he did not worship God. He went to work, constructing something expressly designed to demonstrate the restoration of life and the continuance of the family name, which is what Bana means. Bana is actually the feminine of Ben, son, and thus it is inclusive of sons and daughters of God. It serves as the basis of Beryth, family, Be'eth, which in turn is the root of Be'eth, covenant, family. It was after my first of 7 iterations of Yada Yahowah, when translating Yeshaya, Isaiah 9, that I discovered something truly remarkable, and I think is important linguistically. There are scores of essential Hebrew words comprised of an interrogatory, typically ma or my, and a verb such as kara, to invite, shafat, to decide, or in this case, zabak, to offer a sacrifice. In each case, the addition of the interrogatory encourages us to ponder the who, what, where, why, and when, even how, of the verb's action. Miqra'ey, therefore, speaks of pondering the who, the what, the where, the when, and the how associated with Yahowah's 7 invitations to be called out and meet. Misfat, as a compound of my and shafat, addresses the various means to exercise good judgment and make informed decisions regarding the process God uses to resolve disputes. Likewise, Mizbach is a place to question, the who, the what, the where, the why, the when, and how of an impending sacrifice. It was introduced at this time so that we would contemplate how, when, where, why, and even how Dowd would become the sacrificial offering which enables our safe passage from earth to heaven. Even Noach would be laid on a mizbach, about a millennia after this episode, when serving as the Adamah Parah on Towrah. And this altar, like the one on the Temple Mount in 2033, that was graceful, not so much of Wookiee, but of me, or not, trying to get him down. He was a wiggler that time. Well, and this particular altar, the one that will reside on the Temple Mount in 2033, was and will be built expressly to allow others to approach Yahowah. Allah, which is a verb, and Olah, a noun, are actually spelled identically in the Hebrew text. It's an eye, a staff, and a person standing up and looking up to God. So it's the perception of and the perspective of a shepherd guiding and leading the flock as a human who is particularly observant. The actionable root of the noun, Olah, to go up, to ascend, and to rise. By extension, it conveys the idea of being lifted up, being taken up, being offered up, to be withdrawn and carried away. The letters Ain, Lamed, He, the eye, a shepherd's staff, and a person standing up, reaching up to God, reveal that we should pay attention to the shepherd who stood up for us so that we can stand before God. As the ultimate shepherd, Yahowah wants his flock to appreciate Dowd's sacrifice and then respond appropriately. And while Dowd's body was not presented on an altar during Pesach, nor would it serve as an oleh, burnt offering, to rise. When Noach is redeployed as Yada, that's when all of these things will transpire, be carried out this way and apply. The Olah vocalization is typically translated as a burnt offering because the fire which is deployed in the process of making a sacrifice causes the essence of it to rise up as flames. Smoke is energy and light. However, there is no hint of zabak, sacrificial offering, or of ish, fire, in the word Olah. And as we shall discover when we progress in our study, verbs define nouns in Hebrew. Therefore, Olah's definition must be consistent with Allah, which is written identically in the Hebrew text, and it means to ascend. And at the very least, include the idea of rising in any proper translation. The text reads, Then Yahowah discerned and accepted the spiritual implications associated with this pleasing aroma. And Yahowah declared in his heart and based upon his judgment, beyond what would be expected and necessary, I will no longer enjoin my contempt for the earth because of mankind, even though the thoughts, inclinations, motivations, intentions, and judgment of man are bad. They are no good. They're wrong. They're evil. They're harmful. They are raw, arrogant, wicked, and improper, of no value, miserable and troubling, vicious, corrupting, and immoral, undesirable, displeasing, injurious, malignant, miserable, afflicting, and just downright sad. from his very beginning, from his inception. Yeah, it's not a very good commentary on humankind. So now you know, again, the reason for the flood. Humans had not measured up, not by a long shot. Further, besides what could be expected and necessary, I will no longer have physical contact with every life form, as I have done. Now, since it was his decision, Yahowah chose to reconcile his relationship with fallen man by having two men take the fall for all mankind. It's not a human sacrifice because it's only their disposable and replaceable bashar, bodies, that are being offered, not their valuable nephesh, souls, or accompanying neshama, consciences. Further, both men, here represented by Noach and Shem, would volunteer, freely offering their mortal lives to extend and elevate the souls of others. Therefore, by acknowledging his approval, Yahowah is on record affirming what the Gadowl does on Pesach and the Qatan accomplishes on Towrah, and how this will more than suffice to resolve the resulting breach. Now, clearly, Yahowah's remedy via the Moedim would be sufficiently graphic to garner people's attention, sufficiently costly to encourage capitalizing, and sufficiently relevant such that the beneficiaries would respect the contribution of the Ma'owr, these luminaries. A price would be paid. Redemption wouldn't be capricious. Souls would be ransomed. God would be fair. Man could contribute, and nothing would ever be capricious. Well, this is actually good news. Men were still bad, and God knew it. Yahowah would continue to kalal, disrespect most men, viewing them with contempt and disdain. Humankind was essentially useless from God's perspective, and virtually no lives mattered. Really, very little has changed. As a percentage of the total population, around 40 million, 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, 8 valued souls are equivalent to about 1,600 in today's world of 8 billion. And that's surprisingly close to the 1 in 1,400 that we calculated when considering the gold refined in Orfor, if you recall. Came to the conclusion that based upon God's prophecy, we should expect about 1,400 mortals as part of that final remnant. The 8 above the ark at this time would suggest a similar number. But this is, of course, of just the potential for the covenant family, and does not include the Goyim that will be deployed also at this time. Yahowah announced as a result that he was pulling away from mankind and from the planet. He would have limited contact with us. And even through his involvement with Adam and Noach, it had been fairly negligible, allowing them to succeed. Future engagements would be very few. They would be short-lived. They would be far between. God would inspire men to lead and guide men, occasionally meeting with us via a voice or avatar, but he would not walk with us again. And that pretty much blows the Jesus myth to smithereens. It also means that if you want to know God and to walk with him, his advice would be for you to listen to those he has chosen to speak for him. The implications are intriguing. Well, it isn't my place to judge, and none among us would have done any better. God appears to be saying that his approach may have been excessive and it may not have been enough, which is to imply that it was, at least in part, born out of prior frustrations. The world he had so meticulously conceived was being polluted by a creature he had created for the opposite purpose, to tend to his garden. Rather than celebrating life, man had become a vicious predator. Instead of meaningful conversation and exciting exploration, man was awash in a sea of lies and of conquests. The part of himself he had given to us, his neshama, his conscience, was now a weapon. The hands he had fashioned to hold were now grasping spears. Everything he had worked so hard to achieve, his hopes, his aspirations for a family, were all but for naught. And truthfully, all he gained by the deluge was some time. By eliminating men and women with a nesama, with a conscience, and starting again with one responsive man and his refined family, we would gain the thousands of years we humans would need for God to train and deploy men who would lead a representative number into the covenant and back to the garden. But that actually wasn't the intent. The primary intent was to mother and father Shem, who was Adam, who is Dowd. God created Adam, who is Dowd, his firstborn, to be his son, to share life, to share the universe. And yet, he didn't measure up, not initially. And God knew that there was nothing that he or his son could do to change that. You see, God was too far removed from Dowd, 7 dimensions versus 3, for Dowd to be able to relate directly to God. He would have been too intimidating. And so God's solution was to present Dowd all manner of parents. Well, not all manner of them. He picked 2 people to be his parents throughout time. But through all manner of time, over 6,000 years, and over 6 distinct lives, Dowd at different times in those lives, and sometime for all of those lives, was given a earthly mother and father to love him, to support him, to nurture him, to encourage him, to support him, to teach him, to guide him. And that was the purpose of building this Tebah together. It would be Noach and Shem working on it together. And they would grow as a result, and Dowd would come closer to the man he would need to be. And at other times, of course, just for the experience of it and to prove the point, God allowed Dowd to be on his own, and it's not how he was designed. He was never designed to be on his own, and it did not go well. And then he would have these same 2 souls, a mother and father, reintervene. And ultimately, the only reason for the mortal remnant in the end is because God wants his beloved son to have a kingdom. And to have a kingdom, you must have those that are part of it. And that mortal remnant represents those people. And God's also saying that, I know it did not work out well in the garden, but let's give it another chance. Let's reboot that scenario too. Let's have those that have been honed to reflect my original intent be given the opportunity to work with this new group of entrants. And it'll turn out better this time. So Yahweh's admission regarding us is polarizing. He said that we, of course, were contemptible and that he had lost respect for humankind. Now, it's a far cry from Judaism, where the Talmud states that Yetzer Ra isn't a bad thing since it was created by G-D, and all things created by G-D are good. Not so much. It is the antithesis of Christianity, where that religion's mythical God loves everyone, well, of course, except Jews, whom he despises. Yahweh isn't trying to save everyone, but instead committing himself to limiting his contact with us, because quite frankly, he doesn't like us very much. God has answered the age-old question, is man basically good or bad? And while Yahweh sees humanity as raw, harmful, even maniacal and malignant, it's actually worse than that, because most are perceived as kalal, without any value, worthless, especially the religious. God's assessment of man is between indifference and disgust, and it remains that way to this very moment. That is why so few are engaged in his covenant and will leave this planet with him. According to our Creator, the smartest and most reasonable judge in the universe, humans are rotten, collectively and individually, whether young or old. Humanity is genuinely wrong about generally everything. Our thoughts, inclinations, motivations, dispositions, intentions, and opinions are as errant and without merit, even troubling and disagreeable, as an average hour spent on X or on Facebook. This has long been my conclusion, especially having traveled the world, having been in 175 countries, having studied religion and politics, having considered the rise of civilizations and now nations, that men and women are individually given the capacity for good or bad, and typically demonstrate both aspects during some aspect of their lives. However, that is not true of mankind collectively. There has never been a benevolent civilization, a nation that educates rather than indoctrinates its people, or an institution either based upon or committed to pursuing the truth. Collectively, man is deadly and oppressive. Our religions and political schemes have caused this to be so. They have ruined us. Now, this is not my opinion, but instead an informed and reasoned conclusion, one proven correct based upon the observable evidence and Yahweh's admission. Should you disagree? Should you prefer a religious, patriotic, humanistic, socialistic, or conspiratorial view to God's take? Well, take up your argument with him and see where it leads now that he has already stated his conclusion. As for me, I see Christianity and Islam, Judaism and Marxism as undeniable proof that mankind has a penchant for evil. So after telling Noach that he could eat whatever he wanted, anything that was moving, without any dietary restrictions, we find one of the many emphatic statements from Yahweh against consuming blood. Then Yahweh explained that shedding of blood would be required for mankind because men had shed so much of it. And this then became an ode to Pesach and to Towrah, where the blood of one suffices to purge the guilt of many. God reminds us that we were made in his image, a lesser dimensional representation of himself. That is to say, we have the potential for better, such that we are enriched and empowered, emancipated to soar through dimensions well past our own. Now, to achieve this vastly preferable state, Yahweh encouraged this small sample of humans, all imbued with a Nasama conscience, to be productive. Even with most humans remaining rotten, he saw that we individually maintain the capacity to prove ourselves worthy, ultimately garnering Yahweh's attention and his trust. Powerful statement. Then God spoke to Noach, the spiritual guide and reliable leader, and to his sons with him, to say, now pay attention, please, to me. I will affirm and further establish my covenant, my family-oriented relationship agreement. Keep in mind here, both my and covenant are singular. Through you and with your offspring and posterity, based upon what you produce and what you sow after you, following you, at your conclusion, and during your last days in the end. Bereshith in the beginning, Genesis 9:9. God was, of course, addressing the two Ma'owr, these luminaries in his audience. He had both of them that were there. Noach would become Yada, and Shem would live again as Dowd. They were designed and disclosed 8 chapters ago in this very same Towrah in its opening book as the witnesses who were willing to fulfill the Moedim, these restoring appointments of the eternal testimony. They would be redeployed souls. This is what they have sown. This is what they will harvest. The audience was comprised of Noach and his sons, including Shem, because the Beryth would be set up and established over the generations and through the millennia. There would be many contributors to it, including God. In this manner, the covenant provided the way to become a child of our Creator, his offspring, encouraging this, working to make it so, is the most productive thing that we can sow and the most valuable treasure that we can reap. Also important, we should never lose sight of the fact that this is Yahweh's Beryth. It's his covenant family. He is offering to include us in it and share his home with his children. But no one can barge in. No one can run through the door. And the religious are excluded. The world at large wants to make this story about Noah's Ark and a global flood, and whether it's mythological or whether it's true. And those who believe it depicts an actual event don't realize that the narrative destroys the viability of their religion. Moreover, the story isn't about an ark, but instead the covenant. And Noach only matters because of the way he was deployed by Yahowah to reset the potential for Nesama man and to help raise the firstborn, Adam, now Shem, to become Dowd. When it comes to understanding Noach's nature, his purpose relative to his mission of making the covenant possible, which is why we are told every detail of this story, we are about to chart an entirely different course than everyone who has explored this story previously. And this is because we have two options regarding the following statement. It can be viewed as the concluding clause of the preceding announcement, such that every animal above the Tebah contributed to the establishment of the covenant, and the animals are therefore part of it. However, I think this is actually absurd. Or, with a lone verb towards the end of the narrative, God could be reiterating that it was time to lead the animals out of the Tebah so that they could repopulate the region. And while I'm not a fan of earthworms, slugs, rats, centipedes, and mosquitoes even being incorporated into the covenant, Yahowah established with Noach at this point, God was so distraught over the degradation of humanity. I don't have an issue with him announcing a Beryth agreement with these other animal life forms, such that they would not be caught up in his feud with humankind. But should that have been the case, God would not have had to repeat Beryth, such that there was one for man and another for these other life forms, rather than one somehow shared between them, or the animals have no means to actually participate. However, since covenant is singular, and there is not a separate one for other living beings, we're forced into making a determination that will profoundly affect how the rest of this narrative plays out. Should animals other than man with a neshama, conscience, be allowed into the Beryth covenant, there is no longer any purpose for the Ma'owr, or for a Nesama, for Adam or Eden, for Noach or the flood, for the Tebah or the Towrah, for Abraham, Yishak, Jacob, Dowd, or the Moedim. Animals cannot read. And everything we have from God regarding him and our relationship with him is presented in writing. There would be no way for God to communicate the expectations for other life forms to express their consent. The Passover lamb in Miqra'ey spared the firstborn sons of Israel, not ewes, calves, colts, or fledglings. Yahweh's bull restores the remnant, not livestock. Even the concept of animals having religious guilt that must be carried away or purged through matzah is nonsensical. Therefore, the message here and that which follows isn't about Bahima, beasts, participating in the Beryth family, but of God caring about being protective of life in its many forms. Now, one last thought before we move on. Since the animals that drown in this region during the flood had done nothing wrong, why were they caught up in the carnage? The fact that God thought sufficiently about them that he had Noach spare each species from extinction is problematic because the same life forms existed outside of the inundated area and would have naturally migrated back. And had there been unique critters living exclusively in this place with DNA, then Yahweh could have created others. After all, he would have had to replenish all aquatic animals, would he not? Since all of them would have perished in that Tebah without aquariums. My best explanation for what is otherwise inexplicable and troubling is that Yahweh wanted to teach us a lesson, and he wanted to offer us an opportunity to prove ourselves worthy. He offloaded the responsibility of protecting life to this man and his family. He was saying, if you want to live with me, show me that you value life by making a contribution to its viability and sustainability. Just as he had coddled and protected, nourished, and guided man in the garden, Noach was afforded the opportunity to do the same for others, thereby showing his appreciation, his comprehension, his character. We were given the opportunity to embrace shared values, enchanting and enhancing our relationship. I think that's rather profound. That it's one thing for we humans to say, I care for animals, and to cry when an animal is suffering. And it's another thing altogether to do something about it, isn't it? Noach and his family were given that opportunity. We, therefore, as humans, with the Nesamo, were given that opportunity. Fortunately, Noach and his family measured up. They met the expectation. They did what needed to be done. These things considered, be aware that Nephesh, Che, Oph, Bahama, and Chawa are all singular. Only Atem, you, is plural. And so each soul, Nephesh, consciousness, of the living, Che, to show the way with you all, among the flying, with the animal, and with all life, Chaya, of the region, Eretz, with you. Including everyone, Min Kol, they came out of the Tebah at this time. Tebah is misspelled in the text here. I will have to go back and edit that if I haven't already. Every life form of the area. Now, set between two affirmations of the covenant, Yahweh may be saying that man and animals have a symbiotic relationship. And we do. Animals must survive for humankind to survive. Therefore, souls would live in the proper way in the relationship to one another because of what Noach and his sons achieved. Life would survive, and certain of us would fly as a result of this Tebah, this vessel of insights regarding the harvest. He may also be addressing the fact that he is bringing us back to the garden where animals, I think, and God seems to concur, are going to be a very important part of the experience. Just because there isn't a covenant with the animals, at least in the sense there is one that has conditions and benefits expressly stated by Yahweh for humans with a Nesama, doesn't mean that God doesn't have a special place in his heart for the life forms that he conceived, and knows that our experience on this earth over the next 1,000 years is going to be tremendously enhanced by life. And that in the millennia thereafter, exploring other life forms, developing other life forms is going to be a huge part of what we do together with Yahowah. So no matter how you view what was said, Yahowah would not repeat the words Kumeth, Beryth, Ani again until his 5th of 7 meetings with Abraham. However, be aware that the follow-on statements differ considerably between these prophetic declarations. In this light, while God continued to use the plural expression of you, everything that follows remains singular, including Bashar, and the verb addressing the individual represented by the title Bashar. So speaking to Noach and his son, namely Shem, Yahowah proclaimed, so at a point in time, I will confirm with you and establish through you what pertains to my covenant with you. Everything associated with the finished and completed work of the Bashar, of the human herald, will continue, never ceasing, never failing. He will enable and receive the benefit of never being separated. This as an extension of his ongoing repetition in testifying, admonishing, and sustaining. Ode. Beyond the expected point in witnessing, helping, and warning from Ud, to sustain, to relieve, to assist, to aid, to testify, to observe, to serve as a witness, execute justice, and take responsibility, to admonish and to warn, while speaking with the utmost confidence, all as a result of the waters which inundate. He will not be an extension or repetition to witness, assist, or admonish for a deluge or a flood, to corrupt or destroy, to ravage or ruin the land. Well, I think that's a good place for us to complete this program. We'll return to the statement as we review it tomorrow. But there are so many insights here that are worth your consideration. For example, God said that his covenant pertains to these 8 individuals, and that what exists of the covenant will be achieved through God's cooperation and collaboration with them. They will stand up, to establish Yahweh's covenant. And it is literally something that God is achieving through these individuals, which helps to reassert the fact that Noach wasn't some random guy, nor was Shem. They are Yada and Dowd. They are the Qatan and Gadowl Ma'owr, the greater and the lesser luminaries. So God is saying that everything associated with the finished and completed work of the Bashar. The Bashar is not out on a vacation. He is committed to doing what needs to be done, every aspect of what needs to be accomplished, everything pertaining to this human herald. It must continue. He will never cease. And he will enable and receive the benefits of never being separated, lo karath, as a result. This is all an extension of this ongoing repetition. He is one of the souls redeployed. He is a witness. His job is to admonish and to sustain, to relieve, to assist, to aid, to testify, to observe, to serve as a witness, to execute justice, to take responsibility. And all of this happens in conjunction with the result of these waters which have inundated. It was manifest for us in the episode of the flood. It will be re-manifest as Yahweh releases the flood waters from under the Temple Mount to purge the religious guilt from the mortal remnant in 33 CE, 7 years from now on Towrah. So he is not to be an extension or a repetition of this particular witness. For a deluge or a flood that is in any way corrupting, there will be no more ravaging or ruining through an inundation of an upwelling of water. Not in the land. It will not ruin. It will not corrupt. It will not destroy. It will purge. It will cleanse. It will sponsor new life. And that, my friends, is the message of this story. As we conclude with Bereshith, Genesis 9:11, I look forward to being with you again tomorrow. It will be the approach to a Shabbat. We will do the vlog on the blog in the morning and family hour in the early evening. Be a long day for us here, and I hope that we will garner your attention and you will enjoy what we have learned and what we're going to share from Yahowah. May Yahowah bless you all. Good evening.
Hey there, thanks for tuning in. That was Fetch. Gotta run now. Catch Yah on our next podcast.